once a small island located in the middle of Bay Lake surrounded by swamplands. Then Walt Disney's Tom Sawyer's Island, then Blackbeard Island, Treasure Island, and eventually Discovery Island, which would be the name of the half-day zoological park that was open for about 25 years. But after its successful opening, the island was eventually left abandoned and became one of the most sought-after spots for urban explorers to visit. This is the story of the abandoned Discovery Island. Discovery Island is probably the most interesting piece of Disney lore that is possibly out there. Of all of the things that Disney abandoned, River Country, Imageworks, Wonders of Life, Discovery Island is one of the largest and the most interesting, and also the hardest to get a single look at as a guest. I personally have a massive passion for all things abandoned Disney, so I'm so excited that it is finally time to cover this topic for Mouselets Monday. This is going to be a longer video because there's so much to cover, so I've broken it into distinct sections covering the history, when it was open, and its abandoned section if you want to watch it in pieces. But now it is finally time to get into why Disney abandoned this island and everything else you need to know about it. Starting with the background. The history of this island is actually quite detailed and involves many owners, but I'm only going to cover a few that really help progress our story and also help us understand why the island has changed names so many times. Because if you don't know the island as Discovery Island or maybe as Treasure Island, it's possible that you've heard it called Raz Island or Riles Island, both names that it was known for many years. The paper trail starts in the late 1880s with a man named Henry Plant, who owned a company called the Plant Investment Company. He bought a lot of land in the Florida swamplands to eventually develop into his railroad system. The land was granted by something called the Florida Internal Improvement Program. Basically, their plan was to build railroads and canals and really progress the transportation at the time in Florida. However, despite this, and for whatever reason, this specific parcel of land was never developed. And after owning the land for several years, he sold the land in 1906 to a man named Joel Riles. And obviously, Riles Island is one of the most common names for this island. That comes from Joel, who lived there for many, many years. Interestingly enough, at least interestingly enough for me, I don't know if most people find this cool, but the island also had another name at this time, and that was Raz Island, R-A-Z. Newspapers at the time say that it was based on a family, the Razes, who lived there, but there's no record of anyone ever living there under that name. So it has these two competing names, Riles Island and Raz Island, and those are the names it's known by for the next couple of decades. But over the next couple of years, the island changed hands many times, there was tax repossession, and eventually it was sold off. And this is where we get one of our most important key players. In 1937, Delmar Nicholson bought the island. He was known as Radio Nick, and he was Florida's first radio disc jockey. And he not only bought the island, but he also bought a portion of Bay Lake, basically where Fort Wilderness is today. Now, Radio Nick renamed the island to Idle Bay Isle, and here he built a small house and also had a farm where he grew kiwis and mangoes and all sorts of other types of fruits. He did hold open houses on the island from 1945 and 1946, and he also actually hosted an overnight Girl Scout leaders trip. But then Radio Nick fell on some hard times, so he had to sell off a portion of this land. He didn't sell the island, but he sold the portion of land where Fort Wilderness Campground is today. And he sold that land to someone named Edward Vrabick. Edward actually built a small fishing lodge that people kind of call Roy's Cabin. We'll get to that in a minute. And that sat on property up until Walt bought the land. Radio Nick did continue living on the island for many years, even after he ended up selling it to a different company. But in 1955, and this is getting close to when Walt was looking at this land, something huge happened, and this could have completely changed Walt Disney World as we know it. In fact, it could have meant that Walt Disney World was built in a totally different location, because a group of 10 businessmen called the Bay Isle Club actually bought 1,128 acres to totally redevelop. And part of the land that was included in that sale was Bay Lake and Riles or Raz Island. The only pieces of land that were actually developed at the time was the small house and farm on Riles Island and the small fishing lodge on the shores of Bay Lake. But luckily, for whatever reason, they didn't end up developing this land. And now we get to our key year where Disney gets involved. The year is 1964, and Walt is flying in his plane looking at all sorts of different sites where he could potentially build his new Florida project. He looks out the window and sees a large lake with an island in the middle and says, "That's it, that will be my Tom Sawyer's Island." And you can probably guess what that island was. It was Riles Island. And so soon after, a company comes in called Bay Lake Properties and they buy the land. This is, of course, one of Disney's many shell companies that they use to buy the land without people raising the prices because they knew that Disney was coming in. And then Roy Disney and land surveyors and many of the men who would be working on the project went out on a site visit. There were not many ways to get around the property at the time. Remember, it was completely undeveloped. there was a small dirt track that led to that old fishing lodge we mentioned, and that's where we actually see Roy Disney in front of it, exploring the land that they later labeled campground. They also took a boat out around Bay Lake and explored all of the areas where they could build beaches, as well as the island and their plans for it. Soon after the site visit, Disney actually breaks ground on their Florida project. They dredged the entirety of Bay Lake. At the bottom, they found the pristine white sand that they used on the beaches of the Contemporary and the Polynesian and the campground. They also added a few other islands. They built 3 on the Seven Seas Lagoon, they added 1 more to Bay Lake, and they kept Discovery Island basically as is. And while they didn't have initial plans to develop it within the first year or so, it was an important part of the Vacation Kingdom. The Vacation Kingdom has been a massive part of the deep dives recently. It clearly is living rent-free in my mind because there really was so much that Disney planned to do with it. I have a full breakdown on the Vacation Kingdom that's really helpful for context and I think pretty interesting, but if you don't have time to watch that, I'm going to summarize it for you here. The Vacation Kingdom was basically Disney's plans to get people to stay on property. At the time, they only had the Magic Kingdom theme park, but they wanted people to stay at the resorts for multiple days. So they added all sorts of activities: horseback riding, archery, tennis, golf, sailing, surfing, swimming, and they planned to build something on this island. And in 1972, we actually got a look at what Disney was planning to do on their island in the 1972 shareholder report. And here's what that said. Treasure Island work has been in progress since last summer on the first phase development of the picturesque island in Bay Lake. Walkways, small lakes, and waterfalls will be available to both explorers and picnickers during 1973. Later, the island will be fully developed so that children may explore Ben Gunn's Fort, Benbow Inn, and the wreck of the Hispaniola, all reminiscent of scenes from Walt Disney's classic film Treasure Island. Development of the island involved bringing 55,000 cubic yards of additional fill to build up the island as well as build up the beaches that were not present at the time. They used that same sand that they found from the bottom of Bay Lake that was sprinkled all over the resort beaches. And just a fun fact, Disney did actually plan to call this island Blackbeard Island at the beginning, so if you've ever heard it called that, that's why, but they very quickly shifted to Treasure Island. Now in 1973, we got another update from the annual shareholder report, and here's what that said. Preparations are continuing for the opening next Easter of Treasure Island. The 11-acre island will be a botanical garden with winding pathways leading along rippling streams and past more than 600 rare tropical birds. Eventually, the island will be augmented with scenes from the classic Disney film, such as the eerie caverns of Ben Gunn, the wreck of the Hispaniola, and the Benbow Inn. And the island did actually open on Easter of the next year. On April 8th of 1974, it opened to guests. They could take a boat from the Contemporary, the Magic Kingdom, or the campground, or if they preferred, they could take the longer World Cruise, one of the many activities offered under the Vacation Kingdom, which was an hour-long cruise involving a stop at Discovery Island. So what about the promised pirate theme? Disney did partially follow through with this, but there was definitely a larger phase 2 expansion that they were introducing. So here's what the island had when it opened up. It had a series of pathways that snaked through the island featuring banana plants, palms, giant bamboo trees, a variety of flowers, as well as exotic birds like the blue peafowl and the spotted guinea. It had a flamingo lagoon where you could find pink Caribbean flamingos and flamingos from Chile. It had the mizzen mast, which was the home of the American bald eagle that was on loan from the US government. It had a shipwreck, remains of the walrus, the lookout point, skeleton lair, Jolly Roger Wharf, and other scenic type areas named after pirates. And it had restrooms, mates and maidens, but that was it for amenities. It did not have a snack stand or anything like that. But Disney knew that they had these big plans to build more, so they actually had a piece of paper, a pamphlet distributed to guests about the future attractions to come. So those included Billy Bones' Dilemma, Captain Flint's first mate falls prey to the perils of the open sea, the Blockhouse, a site of the Battle of the Treasure Map, Spyglass Hill, a fantastic group of rocks in the heart of the island, which was a primeval playground, Ben Gunn's Cave. As mysterious as the strange hermit himself, its exact location is unknown, but we know it's someplace on this island. And the wreck of the Hispaniola, this seagoing vessel led by Captain Smollett, once anchored here in search of buried treasure, only to be overtaken by her mutinous crew. If you're getting the vibe, this actually was a lot like what we ended up seeing at the Pirates Lair at Disneyland or at Disneyland Paris, and even Tom Sawyer's Island at Walt Disney World. It did take a couple of years for it to happen. The island was open for about 2 years, and at the end of 1975, they closed it for refurbishment. It opened in June 1976, and here's what it included now. They added suspended walkways that cross 6 rivers, and they added an aviary the size of a football field and once the largest walk-through aviary in the world. They added a concession stand and other rest areas. They added more of that pirate theming like Skeleton Island, Dead Man's Island, and a scavenger beach. They also added the iconic shipwreck beach where you could actually climb onto a shipwreck. They added thousands of birds, some of which were on the island before, but many of which were new. and they added other animals like tortoises, alligators, and monkeys. The island closed again in late 1977, this time for another retheme. Now, why this was actually rethemed is relatively unknown, and how the new name came about is also unknown, but some have reported that it was based on a contest that a cast member won who was paid $50 for the name. So in 1978, Discovery Island officially opened, and this is the name that it had from 1978 to basically current day in 2025.
Have your own true life adventure at Discovery Island, an 11-acre zoological park filled with native and exotic birds and animals, along with a variety of endangered species.
They added more species of animals and plants to the island. They also added the Thirsty Perch snack bar and picnic areas, as well as another snack bar further in the island. And it was generally open between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. For the next 20 years, the island remained open, but it did wane in popularity, because Epcot opened in the early 1980s and then MGM Studios in the late 1980s. They also opened up Typhoon Lagoon and then Blizzard Beach. Basically, there were a lot of other activities that guests were choosing to do, and not a lot of them were choosing to go to Discovery Island. Disney did have some initiatives to try to bring more people to the island. In the early 1990s, they launched the Discovery Island Kid Venture. This involved a lunch, crafts, and a souvenir photo for kids. And they also added several other activities for kids, like Chippendale Rescue Rangers Discovery Club, to try to encourage more families to come to the island. And while many people look fondly back at their times on Discovery Island or Treasure Island with great memories, there were a couple of controversies. Starting in 1988, Disney began working with a pretty controversial group. This group was called Helping Hands, Simian Aids for the Disabled, and they actually raised monkeys for quadriplegic recipients. Animal rights groups had a huge issue with this, and eventually Disney did stop working with this group. But something even more notable is that in 1989, Disney was accused by the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals of mistreating vultures that landed on Discovery Island. And Disney did confirm that some of them died while being captured by employees, but did not ever admit to any wrongdoing. Following this allegation, state and federal officials ended up charging Disney with 16 counts of animal cruelty. Disney did turn things around though. In the 90s, it was the first zoological park to breed the South American Moguir stork and the white-crested hornbills. And many people say that Discovery Island really set the way for Disney to open up Animal Kingdom, because they had this experience in one, having an accredited zoological park, and also dealing with animals and all of the issues that came with that. And so now the year is 1998 and Animal Kingdom opens.
First came the Magic Kingdom, then Epcot, then Disney MGM Studios, and now... Introducing the most adventurous Walt Disney World theme park ever. Disney's Animal Kingdom. The imagination of Disney gone wild.
Now guests had a full theme park to not only see all sorts of different animals, but also ride thrill rides and see shows. And this basically was the nail in the coffin for Discovery Island. And it's very likely that Disney knew that this was going to happen and actually planned for it to happen, meaning closing Discovery Island permanently. And so on April 8th of 1999, exactly 25 years after it opened, the island permanently closed to guests. At the time, a Disney spokesperson said, "Our guests have so many more choices and they're choosing other things. It's a little bit sad when we say goodbye to an old favorite, but change is part of the process." Disney began finding new homes for the animals that once lived on Discovery Island. Some of them went to Animal Kingdom, and others ended up going to zoos across the nation. And Disney also began making plans for what was going to replace Discovery Island, because to be clear, they didn't plan to leave the island abandoned. This was prime real estate, and they were going to develop it. So here were their potential plans. And honestly, the first one seems a lot like Discovery Island. It was basically a scavenger hunt where families would spend a full day experience on the island searching for clues that was pirate themed. But the next two were a little bit different. One of them was Camp Hakuna Matata. Lion King was pretty new at the time, and they thought that they could have some sort of wilderness camp for families or kids to go to that was based on the island. The third one was the potential to have 4 honeymoon-themed cottages on the island. And while they didn't end up doing this, obviously, they did end up building cottages right across the way at Copper Creek, and I wonder if this is something they've always wanted to do and they were just looking for a place to do it. And the last one is probably the one that's most notable, and that was based on a video game called Mist Island. This one also might have made it the furthest because the Mist crew themselves actually toured the island. They walked the pathways among the trees, and they noted that it perfectly matched the atmosphere of their game. But there were problems fitting Mist into Disney's larger schemes, and so the plan fell apart. So, what did Disney do? After they shared several of these things that could be coming in newspaper articles, they did nothing. They literally did nothing, and they just let Discovery Island sit there. Now, a few years after Animal Kingdom opened, Discovery Island kind of came back to life, but nothing to do with the actual island. When Animal Kingdom opened, the main sort of hub area of the park where the Tree of Life was called Safari Village. But several years after the park opened, they renamed it to Discovery Island. Unknown why, I do think it's a good name and maybe they just wanted to use it. So basically, anything you can find online nowadays is related to the Discovery Island at Animal Kingdom and not this abandoned island. And now let's get into what happened when the island was abandoned. And this is where our timeline takes a couple of jumps. Because when Disney abandons something, they make it disappear. They take it off maps, they take it off promotional materials, they take down all the signage, and it's almost impossible to see it's there unless you can see it in plain sight. It also helped that River Country closed shortly after and was also left abandoned because they were able to kind of hide those things in tandem. The only way you could see River Country or Discovery Island was passing by in boats or the people that chose to sneak onto them. And of course, we are going to cover that. But before I cover that, I feel the need to say that you should never, ever, ever sneak backstage at Disney, especially to a place like Discovery Island. You'll understand why soon, but it's incredibly dangerous. You will be arrested. You'll be charged with a felony. It's trespassing. There are so many reasons to not do it. Let's just all enjoy the people that did do it and not do it ourselves. So for many years, it was just completely quiet on the whole Discovery Island front. Nobody knew what was happening. There were some talk on some message boards that I found on Walt Disney World Magic of people asking what was going on, but no one really knew. And in 2009, we got our first update. So just exactly a decade after the park closed. And this update came from someone named Shane Perez, and he shared it on his blog. Now, the interesting thing is, or maybe it's pretty smart of him, but Shane Perez was very strategic about when he wanted to share this, because he actually visited the island in 2004. But he didn't want to get arrested with any trespassing violations, so he waited 5 years to share that, so it's outside the statute of limitations. And he was really the first look into what was going on this island, and it was actually kind of insane. Disney had done nothing. They hadn't maintained anything. They hadn't done anything other than just abandon their stuff. It's like people got up one day, left the island, and then never went back, which is basically what happened. His blog post is incredibly interesting. It was also covered by a few news articles, so let's take a look at his experience.
Small world, but at Disney, parts of it are off limits.
One group took a forbidden e-ticket ride into Disney's dark side and posted those pics online. West 2's Kendra A. Strike with the Magic Kingdom controversy.
Places you went to?
Yeah, I just can't believe that we build these amazing things and then we just forget about them.
For Shane Perez, that forgotten landmark waiting to be revisited, Disney's Discovery Island. The conquest, part of a growing international subculture, shared online called Urban Explorers.
It's exploring your environment, anything urban, anything man-made.
Perez tells about his potentially dangerous and legally questionable adventure on his blog, saying his group's first attempt to get to the island by inflatable boat was blocked by Disney's frequently passing ferries. The second attempt took a middle-of-the-night 300-foot swim from Fort Wilderness Campground to the island.
It's a certain visceral experience you can't really define.
Once on the island, Perez pictures document the eerie experience. The lights remain on around the perimeter, but deeper into the overgrown paths on the island.
Surprise how dark it is in here.
The group discovers abandoned buildings and cages still standing from the 11-acre zoological attraction, preserved snakes in jars, even employee pictures, left behind after Discovery Island shut down in 1999. The island was once plagued by a vulture problem. The urban explorers came across 2 aggressive young vultures, then wrapped up their excursion before the sunrise exposed the unwanted tourists.
You're walking through history. It's a different way of doing that.
A Disney spokesperson tells me it could trespass Perez from all of its properties forever, but hasn't yet. The statute of limitations for trespassing charges is 4 years, but Perez tells me it's been longer than that since he and his friends visited the island, just recently blogged about it.
Pretty incredible, right? Disney left everything behind, literally everything. Just random pieces of paperwork that they assumed, I guess, they would go back for, but then didn't. We did get another update in 2007 from a cast member this time named Nomius. Him and his friends actually snuck on the island and were able to capture some pretty incredible photos. Again, these photos showed all sorts of paperwork that was just left behind, likely from cast members assuming they would be back. And he did a short interview for the news.
This former Disney employee turned explorer goes by the name Nomius.
I got to see really cool stuff that no one would probably ever get to see in their lifetime.
One thing you're not meant to see is what's left of Discovery Island. It was a place where guests could observe the island's birds and animals until it was shut down more than a decade ago. For Nomius, that made it a perfect place to explore.
We borrowed some Disney boats and paddled over.
You stole them?
We took them back. We brought them back when we were done.
It was 2 in the morning, pitch black, when he and his friends made the trip onto the island back in 2007.
It's a visceral experience. The island is really trashed.
After this, Disney put a lot of measures in place to make sure that no one could visit the island again, and that included a big fence across the dock to make it harder for boats to dock. And honestly, it seemed to work, because for the next decade or so, all was quiet on the Discovery Island front. That is until the notorious urban explorer named Matt Sensois came on the scene. He is the urban explorer who snuck onto Everest to see the Yeti, who snuck onto Thunder Mountain, into the Native American village, into Wonders of Life, everywhere. And one of the things he did was go to Discovery Island, actually multiple times. On his first visit, you can see that while it definitely was abandoned, things were in an okay position in terms of what you could see. But he later visited after a huge hurricane, and there you could see that the aviary had totally collapsed, the roofs of buildings caved in, even the walkways, he fell through one and got hurt. The following year, another urban explorer visited the island. This was getting out of hand, and Disney was realizing that. He documented his experiences online, but according to him, he was not issued a trespass warning, and Disney did not ever find him. And finally, we reached 2020, and this is when we get probably the most insane explorer who actually visited Discovery Island, because there was a man named Richard McGuire who decided that he was going to stay there for a full week. He, like many others, took a boat to the island where he barely made it on, and then he triggered one of the trail cams. Disney had installed trail cams, usually what you would see out if you're like hunting, to catch anyone sneaking onto the island. Instantly, they were warned, and actually one of their cast members placed a 911 call to get the county sheriff to come out. And so here is what that call said.
Orange County Sheriff's Office, you're being recorded. This is Operator Moore. How may I help you?
Hi, this is Lucy at Walt Disney World Security.
Hi.
Hi, I've got an investigator requesting county assist in response to Discovery Island, which is at the Fort Wilderness, or next to Fort Wilderness.
Do you have an address or?
Yes, hold on one moment.
Okay.
It's 4600 Fort Wilderness Trail.
Fort Wilderness Trail?
Yes.
Okay, and what's the name of what's the name of it?
Discovery Island.
And what is your name?
Lucy at Security Control.
Okay, Lucy. Okay. And is there a callback number for you? Okay. What is the situation, ma'am?
They have a sighting of a person on an area that is actually out of bounds and abandoned, sort of. There should be nobody on the island.
So there's sighting of a person. Is that security fighting, ma'am? I'm not.
Someone was seen in an out-of-bounds area that's actually been.
Okay, so it was because you said fighting. Was it fighting or
fighting?
Okay, sighting of a person in a restricted area.
Yes.
Okay. Do we have a description? Male, female, white, black, Hispanic?
He did not give me one. The investigator who called it in said the person was seen on camera. He didn't give me a description.
Okay. Okay, are you all en route or are you there?
They're en route. They have to get a boat to get to the island. So that's happening at the moment.
Okay. Okay, well, we'll send deputies out there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
After this call was placed, the sheriff's department actually went out and went onto the island, and they had body cam footage, So we got really what is the last look at the state of the island. Meanwhile, Richard McGuire was hiding out. Remember, this island is over 11 acres. There's a lot of hiding spots, especially with all of the abandoned infrastructure. And so while they had their guns drawn and they were looking for him, they were unable to find him. He actually managed to swim away and escape the island, but then ended up turning himself in because they arrested his girlfriend or they were about to take her to jail. And so he took the fall for her, which is the right thing to do because he was the one who, snuck into the island. But he is the last documented person who has stepped foot on the island as far as we know for urban explorers. If you wanted to sneak in today, you literally couldn't. There is a fence everywhere. It is highly patrolled. They have trail cams. There's security around there constantly. Disney has had it with people sneaking onto the island, and it's not going to happen. But what about the future of the island? What exactly is Disney going to do? Well, there's always the possibility that Disney does demolish the existing infrastructure on the island. Now, why haven't they done that? One of the reasons is cost. Typically, if they're going to fix something up and demolish an abandoned attraction, they're doing it because they have a redevelopment project, like River Country and then the new resort being built, or Wonders of Life and then the Play Pavilion, or ImageWorks and the DVC Lounge. But there's not really plans that we know of for Discovery Island, and so they haven't wanted to spend the money to do it. The other thing is there are a lot of native species that live on the island, and so Disney would have to be really careful in removing them or doing any work in that way. And so as far as we know, the island will remain just abandoned and untouched. If you want to get a look at the island, your best bet is to take one of the boats to the campground or rent your own boat and you can circle the island, but there's not much to see and make sure you do not attempt to get off or dock in any way. You can also get a couple of good looks from Google Earth, but it's so overgrown that again, you just can't see much. But that is all I have for you today for the Mouselets Deep Dive. This has been a long one, but such a good one because of the fascinating history of Discovery Island. Coming up soon, I know I want to cover ImageWorks and River Country, but let me know what you want to see next, and I will see you all next week. Bye!